Hi guys, and welcome back to the Big Sew Along. I'm Ginny, and as always, I thank you very much for choosing to spend some time with me. Today we are going to be talking about raw edge seams on woven fabrics. I'll do a separate video next week with an actual garment, and we will go over raw edge like hems, armholes, that kind of thing next week. Before we get to that today though, first let me tell you what I'm wearing. It's not just a t-shirt. But I always forget to say, I am wearing my very first try at the Tessuti Naia pants. There's them here. I want to say I cut a size 12 in these, you guys, but now I can't remember. It was either a 12 or a 14. This fabric is just an old, another old tablecloth. You can kind of maybe see some of the damask in this. It's a linen tablecloth. So I think because of the weight of this fabric, the wrinkles are a little weird because it's got like pleats in the front and they just like hang a little funny, but I think that's just down to the fabric. Anyways, let me just say that I really love these pants, and I'm going to make another pair and I will give you a full review when I do. The other thing is, a few days ago, I got a message from Rosie. She was talking about, she was asking me about the Cris Wood Sews Envelope dress, and she wanted to know if I could go further into how I adjusted the neck, because if you guys remember, that was like a year ago, so you may not remember, but I'll link the video to this for this review down below for anybody who wants to go back and watch it. The Cris Wood Sews Envelope dress is essentially 3 rectangles: a left front, a right front, and a back. The left front and the back and the right front get attached to the back to make the neck hole. That dress, because the way it's constructed, it tends to ride forward. And I showed in that video last year how I lowered the back neck a little bit to give it more room so it rides forward a little bit less. Rosie's question is, isn't it just going to keep happening? And the answer to that is yes. Because the way that dress is constructed, there's no actual curve where your neck would sit. The neck is where 2 pieces of fabric come together. It creates a V. And because it pulls from that V, it's always going to pull up. I'm not going to explain this very well, but it is always going to pull forward just because of the nature of the design. You can alleviate it a little bit by lowering that a bit. I don't want to discourage anybody from making the envelope dress because I have made it several times and I love that dress. It does always ride forward. If that's going to be an issue for you, then I highly recommend taking a look at the Pattern Emporium Sunkissed Kaftan that I talked about last week, because it is essentially the same shape as the envelope dress. The envelope dress has a center front seam and a seam that goes like right across, right about here, or maybe a little higher. The Sunkissed Kaftan has no center front seam and just has a straight across shoulder seam. Now, because of that straight across shoulder seam, it has a regularly constructed neck where it scoops out a little bit at the back and has a V in the front. That is why that one tends to not ride forward. That pattern also has a very wide sort of statement facing that gets folded out to the front. And if you didn't want that, you could just fold it to the back and not have that. You could have a plain front. Those are the main differences between the two. I've measured the patterns. The Cris Wood Sews pattern is drafted to your sizes, so you can really use her formula to figure out what size you want to wear. The Pattern Emporium is more standard sizing, just small, medium, large, based on what size you want. But what I did was check my measurements from my Cris Wood Sews pattern, the dress that I made, and I used that measurement to determine which size I was going to make in the Pattern Emporium Sunkissed Kaftan. Again, I am not saying anything bad about the envelope dress. I happen to love that dress. I like both of these dresses an awful lot. I'm a kaftan kind of person. I'm just saying that if that forward riding situation is something that's going to continually bother you, then just make the Sunkissed Kaftan. It's essentially the same dress, just with a different neckline. Alright, so let's talk about our raw edges on woven fabrics in seams. I have some samples here for you. This first one is just, I just sewed the wrong sides together, pressed the seam open, and left it. And you can see, hopefully you'll be able to see, I cut the edges of this fabric with just my regular straight edge scissors, and you'll see why I'm telling you that in a minute. This is pretty sturdy. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. If I pull it hard, you can get a little gap there. It does not feel, here, if I turn it this way, can you see how when I pull it, the seam sort of starts to curl up? Now, you're probably not going to be doing that, but it does make it feel like a little bit less stable. This next one is exactly the same. Wrong sides sewn together. Sewn wrong sides together, but on this one, I used my pinking shears instead of my straight shears to cut the edges. And I personally think this one actually looks pretty sloppy, so I'm not really sure what happened. But I like the way that the pinked edge frays a little bit better than the straight edge. And I think I do mostly pinked edges from here on out. I think I have one other straight edge one to show you. Again, this is the same. It curls up if you pull on it. It's not super stable. So the next one I did was the exact same thing. Wrong sides together, pressed open, pinked edges. And this one, you can see here, it has, I used dark thread so you'd be able to see. I sewed those edges down. I sewed the seam allowances down, and I did it about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam allowance on both sides. So far, all of these seam allowances started out at about 1/2 of an inch. This next one, I used Charlotte's method. She recommended when we were talking about raw edges on knit fabrics. So this one, I used a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I cut a piece of bias strip 1 inch wide. So I sandwiched that bias strip in between the two pieces of fabric. I put them right sides together with the bias strip in between. I sewed them with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then I trimmed the edge of the bias tape down with my pinking shears. And so far, this is the one I most prefer. It is a little bulky is the only thing, because you have 3 layers of fabric in that seam. And also, you just have to be careful which direction you're pressing it to make sure that you're pressing your frayed edge the direction you want it to go. Okay. This next one is, again, 2 layers of fabric sewn wrong sides together. And this one, this one is also a 5/8 inch seam. I trimmed the lower piece of fabric, the under fabric down, the seam allowance. I trimmed the seam allowance on the under fabric down, and then I pressed the remaining seam allowance from the upper piece of fabric. I pressed it over that and stitched it down. I hope you'll be able to see that. I did not use a different color of thread in this because I already had white in my machine. But so it's essentially constructed almost like a felt seam, only you just don't have the edge turned under. Again, this one is a pinked edge. I like the way this one looks, and it is it's lightweight. It feels like a regular seam. It's not bulky at all. Although, and maybe it's just this fabric, it does have a nice fray on the edge. I'm not sure I like it as much as the one with the bias. I tend to like the way bias frays better than a straight edge, and I think that's the biggest difference there. Now this last one is exactly the same as the one I just showed you, only in this sample I did not trim the under seam allowance down. They just have both seam allowances pressed towards the back and edge stitched at about an eighth of an inch away from the seam. I think that probably this one looks better, and I think that's down to having 2 layers of like frayed fabric there, so it looks a little heftier. It does not, even though you have 3 layers of fabric there. It doesn't feel terribly bulky. This is a pretty lightweight linen though. If you're using something heavier, I think that might be bulky. Okay, I said that was the last one and it's not, because I also used, I also tried this on a couple pieces of cotton, and these are both just, they're both the same, I think. It's just a cotton, I don't know, like a poplin or something. This first one is just wrong side sewn together, seams pressed out. And the edges on this one are cut with a straight, regular sewing shears. And you can see what that fraying looks like, which is not, it's not a lot. It's going to get more the more you wash it though. And then this is the last one. This is exactly the same thing, only on this one, I trimmed my seam allowances down with the pinking shears. And it's funny, like I much prefer the way the pinking shears look on the linen. I just like the way that that frays better. I'm not crazy about it on the cotton because it looks like pinking shears. Just looks like little triangles. Anyways, so you have a variety of finishes there. They're all essentially sewn wrong sides together with different finishings for the seam allowances. My overall preferences for me, I like the one with the bias strip in it, probably the most. My second favorite is this one, which is both sides pressed to, both seam allowances pressed to one side with a edge stitch next to the seam allowances with a pinked edge. That's a lot to say, sorry. So, I am going to work on my project for next week. I am working on the Sew Liberated Studio Tunic. Karen gifted me this pattern more than a year ago, and I've been dying to make it ever since, so I don't know why it's taken me so long. But I am going to make that this week, and I'm going to work on some finishes for, some raw edge finishes for necks, armholes, and pockets. And I will share that with you guys next week. Alright guys, I think that is it for me this week. I hope you have found this helpful. Like I said, we'll get back into a little more detail on this next week. And until then, I wish you all happy sewing.